Okay, hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Teachers Run Club podcast. Today, I'm really excited to be chatting to someone that I've met and spoken to a few times now. That is Mark Agnew. He is an adventurer, a rower, and a keynote speaker, and someone I met at the Bedfordshire School Sports Conference a few months ago. And as soon as I heard him talk, I knew straight away that we needed to get him on the Teachers Run Club podcast. So, Mark, thank you for joining us.
No, thank you very much for having me.
So when I heard you talking, Mark, about your adventures and your rowing challenges, straight away I was just sitting there thinking, I need to chat to this guy. And as soon as we were done, I went up and spoke to you, and we probably spent most of that day at Centre Parks and Wogan just chatting around the other things that were going on. So to start, do you want to just give us a real brief introduction to yourself and the kinds of challenges that you take on and sort of what your day-to-day life looks like at the moment, just so we've all got a bit of an idea of who Mark is.
Yeah, well, you described me as an adventurer, and I suppose a bad adventurer or a crap adventurer would be more accurate. The biggest expeditions I've tried so far are attempts to row across the Atlantic, and on both occasions I've failed. I've got a bunch of other, successful adventures, but those are the ones which have really seemed to have stuck in people's minds. So I've started telling those stories about those failures and what I learned from them. But day to day, I think most of my time is probably spent as a journalist rather than adventuring. Before I was a keynote speaker, I was a editor for a newspaper in Hong Kong, writing about outdoor and extreme sports. And since moving back to the UK, I continue to do that for a number of publications. Not all extreme sports. Some of the stuff's a bit more boring to try and keep the paychecks coming in. But as time goes on, more and more keynote speaking. To bigger and bigger audiences, telling my story of failure, how I bounced back, what I learned, and how I'm taking that forward into my next adventures.
All right. So that is a really brief summary of what has been some brilliant challenges and adventures that we'll get into more detail on. And you mentioned there about reframing what adventure was for you and reframing success, especially after those two really tough experiences that you went through when you had your rowing the Atlantic challenges. And with both of them, as you said already, you didn't fully succeed in the way that you planned for. I mean, with both of the challenges, you were trying to set world records, weren't you?
Yeah, so I've tried to row the Atlantic twice. The first one was it's sort of a paper place. You pay a captain who has a spot on a boat, and he's going to row the Atlantic, and you just go with him. And that's cheaper generally because they split the cost between people. And above all, it's safer because the captain knows what they're doing, and you've got this really experienced guy on board. Also, I thought instead we had this guy who had articles going back to the 1990s, entitled Captain Calamity. But I was so determined to do it and so invested emotionally and financially that I chose to ignore a lot of red flags and finally departed with him in Christmas time 2016, and we didn't get very far at all. We were lifted off by helicopter uh, about 44 hours in, barely even 2 days. So pretty embarrassing stuff. Before we'd even, touched back down in Spain, it felt like all the tabloids in the UK had gone for us, and there was more Captain Calamity headlines. But I tried again, planning my own expedition this time, not paying for place. This time I entered a race. I thought they would sort of give you the framework to make sure that it was safe and prepared. And I went with in a pair, me and a woman. And unfortunately, we only got about 3 days in. And then a combination between her struggling to adjust to time at sea and a battery power problem. And that decision was much more ambiguous. The first time we had to get off the boat. This time she was getting off the boat because she was struggling to adjust to time at sea. So I was left with the choice to go on solo or not. And our battery was not charging. So I couldn't decide whether I was crossing the objective risk into the reckless risk of rowing the Atlantic solo without proper equipment, or whether I was just looking for a face-saving excuse to get off because I was overwhelmed. Was I making the sensible decision getting off, or was I a worse? And I still don't know what the correct answer was. That was why that it caused me so much turmoil. So after that row, I was really cut up about it. I really was full of self-loathing for a year at least. Sometimes even now, I just think about how much easier my life would have been if I just sucked it up and got on with it, rather than keeping back at square one all over again. And yeah, it cut me out for ages. I wanted to be an adventurer, whatever the hell that means, and I felt like I wasn't one, and I just felt so worthless. So yeah, those were my two tough experiences. The second one in particular. Um, I can't even remember the question now. I've gone on a waffle.
No, that's fine. You're giving us an outline of these two challenges that have kind of reframed your trajectory in life, haven't they? They've kind of changed the
Yeah,
way that you've looked at challenge and adventure. And you've had a host of successful challenges and a host of really successful adventures that you have presumably also directed you to get into the big challenges that you ultimately didn't succeed in. However, you have succeeded in other ways. And that's what we're going to focus
yeah.
on, is what the successes you have taken from these perceived failures, because we learn from absolutely everything we do. So this podcast is aimed directly, or aimed mainly, sorry, at teachers and teachers who are runners. We're trying to encourage more teachers to be active, and it might be that they've just found running, or they've just found activity, or maybe they're quite a experienced runner and they're trying to push themselves to the next level. So for people who are listening, this is like massive. These are huge challenges. And like I've said before on these episodes, that everything can be focused down to whether you are really just starting and you're starting Couch to 5K, and you might have had two or three attempts where you've got to week 3, got to week 4, and then you've kind of thought you've lost that momentum and you've had to go back again. And what we're going to discuss now is how to perceive that, as how you're taking the wins from that. Yes, you've got to week 3 and you've had to start again. That might seem that you've failed Couch to 5K. However, what are the things that we can take from that? So, how did you begin to reframe success in these two challenges in particular?
Well, I think the problem that the origin of my sort of mental health crisis following the second failure was that I'd come to define the success of rowing the Atlantic, all of my adventures, in a really binary fashion. I have a bit of a competitive streak, and I'd lent too much into that. I wanted to set the world record. I wanted to row across the Atlantic, and anything short of that was failure. Don't set the world record, failure. Don't cross the Atlantic, failure. And that had began to bleed into other adventures too. I wanted to set good times on runs, or I wanted to do objectively impressive things. And as I got sucked more and more into that, I'd forgotten about the reasons that I really wanted to get involved into into adventures, which was, for me, firstly, the relationships. I never wanted to do any of this solo. I wanted to have an incredible shared experience. And also, I wanted to be in nature. I could row 3,000 miles on a rowing machine. Why would that be different to rowing across the Atlantic? Well, because I wanted to be out in nature. I wanted to see the swells and the silence and the stars and the winds. And so after my second failure, a long time afterwards, I started really trying to examine, why do I want to do this? Just so I could, if I remembered why I wanted to do it, maybe go again. And when I started asking that question, I thought that I would find a competitive fire again, a reason to compete. But instead, I particularly came across work by two psychologists called Katrina Douglas and David Careless. And they talk about 3 reasons why sports people take part in sport. And according to them, there's 3: performance, relationships, and discovery. Performance being the binary nature of sport, relationships, building relationships through your sport, discovery, exposing yourself to new experiences, whatever that can mean in different contexts. Now, theirs isn't like a self-help guide. It is literally just a way of understanding why somebody might want to do something. But to me, it really spoke to me about, well, I should have all 3. I'd forgotten the latter 2, and I'd focused so much on performance. So, re-examining the relationships as a core motivation, refining discovery as a core motivation, sort of it freed me from failure, because allowed me to judge success on my own terms. If you set out to run a 5K and you don't, well, that's a failure on the performance. But if you set out to run a 5K, you join a running club, you make loads of new friends, and you have this incredible shared experience, then it's a success, and you're more likely to come back next time and eventually run 5K. Or, where are you going to run 5K? You have to find a local park maybe you haven't found before, or run around your streets, and you see new parts of your own city, your own area. You don't run 5K, but that's an experience that you can draw on. You can judge it a success, and by enjoying it, you're more likely to come back and then run 5K next time. But if your only metric is running 5K and you don't, first of all, that's a failure. Second of all, are you likely to come back second time when you have nothing else to draw on except for that demotivation? And then thirdly, for me, I'm now training harder than ever because, before the abstract idea of setting a world record was a way to push myself. But now, if I'm wanting to be forming relationships with my crewmates, then that's a more powerful drive to not be the one letting the team down, to be a valuable cog in the team. That's like a more intrinsic drive, and one that I don't, I don't, I'm letting other people down. I'm accountable. So my training doesn't necessarily slip off like it would have before. If, oh, well, what's the record? I can pick up the training next time kind of thing. So those are the ways that I've freed myself from failure. By diversifying my motivation and having a range of both intrinsic and extrinsic instead of just simply having that one binary extrinsic performance related goal.
Trying to switch this up so that people are thinking about this in how they can reframe that for their own personal challenges, because those three things are so important, and you've learned them through your attempts and through your failures. And I hate using it as failures because we're talking about how these are actually massive successes. Are you able now to look back on those two particular challenges and see them as successes? Or is that something that now when you go into something new, you're setting these new goals for yourself, and that's how you're planning your event, that's how you're challenging yourself with these new frameworks? Or do you still look back on those two attempts at rowing the Atlantic and think, oh, they were failures, or actually, no, they were successes because of X, Y, or
Z? Well, I guess a number of ways. I guess I'm happy in some sense because it forced me to be introspective. And now I think that I've got this new framework. And it's not about learning those ones. It's sort of about relearning them or realizing them. When I look, but now that I know that the things that are important to me are relationships and discovery, I look back all the way back to my school time rugby career where I really, really enjoyed it. And I thought we were enjoying it because we were winning. And now I'm like, oh, it was about relationships all along. It's just a way of articulating it to myself. And had I not failed, maybe I would never have articulated that, in which case, even if I'd succeeded, it maybe would have confirmed the performance narrative, and then I would have continued down that line. And sooner or later, my expectations wouldn't have been met, and I would have had the catastrophe. So I'm happy that it happened in the sense that it made me realize what I liked about this, and it's liberated me to open the door to so many more adventures that I can judge on my own terms instead of always having a performance goal. I mean, some adventures don't even have a performance goal. I just kayak around a particular thing at whatever rate I feel like kayaking because I want to explore and have that discovery or shared experience. So there certainly were lessons within the failure, which I'm happy that I took. Whether or not I had the relationship, they probably didn't go on long enough for me to have a real relationship shared experience or the discovery experience. So perhaps they were failures, but they were certainly useful. I guess the problem with them is you can never prove the counterfactual. Had I decided to stay on that boat and go on solo and row across the Atlantic, who knows what else I would have learned. I'm sure it would have been a formative experience spending 2 months alone at sea.
And I may not have even been here having this conversation.
I may have died. or may have got to the other end and learned something else, which we'll never know. But I'm certainly happy with the lessons I've learned. And and I think it's changed adventuring for me forever. And I can really, really enjoy it now.
It's brilliant because what you're switching this up to is the enjoyment factor. You have to enjoy what you're doing. And I might have talked to you about this before when we were chatting, that I grew up playing ice hockey, and my sole focus was being the best. I wanted to be the best player on the team. I wanted to be the top goal scorer. And eventually I fell out of love with that sport because of the amount of pressure that I put on myself. And I would get to the rink earlier than anyone else. I would be getting so, in the zone so early that by the time it got to the game starting, I'd sort of psyched myself out. Yeah, there was a couple of games I can remember really specifically where stuck in traffic, lost turned up 5 minutes before the game started, threw my kit on, and I'd go and play really, really well. And it started to
But
make you.
were you the best? Like you had the pressure on you to be the best, but were you the best?
I thought in certain teams I played on, I was, and I think I enjoyed the pressure. I enjoyed being the best person on my team, um, and I thrived on that. But it just built this kind of ego, I suppose, that you had to live up to. And then
Yeah,
when you didn't, or when I didn't feel like I had lived up to that reputation, I was so hard on myself, and eventually stopped me playing altogether because I just didn't enjoy it anymore. And something I talk about a lot with teachers, specifically within PE, because that's my background, it's finding sports that children enjoy doing. And it's not about whether you win or whether you lose or what the sport even is. It's trying to find something that every child enjoys that they're going to want to continue doing as they grow into adults. And then likewise for adults and for teachers to re-find that joy of sport and activity. You know,
yeah,
so many of us are so busy living our lives that we don't have time to do the things that we once enjoyed as a child. So
yeah.
it's trying to find that, refine that, isn't it?
Well, the reframing for me has certainly let me re-enjoy it because, you know, initially it was a way to inoculate myself from failure. I couldn't fail if I was free to judge success on my own terms, which is still a relatively negative way to like approach things. But now it's allowed me to enjoy it, I guess, because the the performance is still important, but the shared goal creates a shared effort, which creates a shared experience. And then if you have that shared experience, the outcome doesn't matter. So it's allowed me to enjoy the journey rather than the outcome. But what is important is I still have that performance metric because let's say we've decided to, I don't know, set the world record, then we all really try our absolute best to set that world record. That's a shared effort. And then we will have a shared experience and bonds and relationships that I'm looking for. But if as long as we're genuinely all going for it, and then if we don't succeed, it doesn't matter. We've all gone for it and we've had the shared experience. It's the shared effort which is important, not the outcome. Whereas previously, if it was the outcome, then the only bit I could enjoy was the finish line. But this is allowing me to enjoy the journey because I'm building those relationships as we go. I'm having those experiences as we go. If there's a storm, it's no longer an obstacle. It's a moment to have an immersive experience in nature. If one of my teammates is struggling, it's not an obstacle to us not setting the world record. It's a chance to build relationships and see each other in a vulnerable state. So it allows me to sort of enjoy the journey and not the destination.
From a school leader's point of view, and this can be any business, this doesn't have to be schools, the same schools that we're specifically talking about right now. If you're trying to create a bond between your staff, it seems to me that putting three people through these adventure situations or scenarios, there's not many better ways of creating a good working bond between staff than seeing each other in these vulnerable states where you have to lean on one another to get through them, and you're creating these memories that you can call back on during your working life as well. I've been very lucky to be involved in a few, challenges with colleagues. We've walked the Three Peaks. We've cycled a couple hundred miles from York to Luton together as a small team of teachers. And as you know, in a few months' time, me and some colleagues are cycling around the UK over 3 days. And the adventure, I'm looking forward to the adventure. Yes, we've got a time frame that we need to keep within just because we can't spend all week away. We need to have a challenge and we need to make sure that we are meeting certain goals. But yeah, I'm most looking forward to the bonds that are going to get created whilst we're along that way. And I really hope that's something that I want the Teachers Run Club to do more of as we progress over the next few months and years, is really support schools and teachers to be able to find the benefit of active challenge and adventure.
Yeah, there's no doubt that and it doesn't have to be for me and for you. Clearly, it's physical. It's a physical shared effort that creates that shared relationships and shared experiences. But it can be anything, like I don't know, a group of engineers who are trying to like create a new engine and they all work really hard together and then one of them clicks and they work out what they need to do and that's a shared experience. It's the shared effort which is like fundamental to that relationship. I guess The one thing that can undermine it is if one person in particular or a group of people, if the shared effort is disproportionately like spread across the group, somebody's training harder or somebody's working harder than somebody else in the group, it pretty quickly begins to undermine that cohesion. The task is important, but the shared effort has to be shared, and then you get these relationships that are phenomenal and for life, irrespective of whether the outcome that you set is achieved.
Yeah, it's getting that buy-in, isn't it? Buy-in from
Yeah.
everyone involved. And if you're in a position where you are taking on an active challenge, you can choose your team, then you can do whatever you need to make sure that you've got the right people in your boat, can't you? If you're
Yeah.
in a work situation and your department, your year group, you don't necessarily get to choose who those people are. So as a leader, then it's your job to try and bring everyone together on side and brought into your overall goal, and that is tough. That's tough to do because you need to be able to have the balance between this is how we're doing it, or how are we as a team going to do it without, as you say, ensuring that everyone is making sure everyone is pulling their weight.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, well, like I said at the start, we're going to try and keep this one short, as some of our other episodes have been quite long. And even though they've been really, really detailed, I want to get the most out of this time that we've got here with Mark. So, Mark, some takeaways from this conversation. What would you say some of the 2 or 3 biggest things we could do as teachers, or just as anyone who enjoys activity? What are the biggest things that we can do to help put us in the right direction to really enjoy and love what we're doing, and hopefully keep up this active lifestyle?
I guess well, I was sort of semi-summarizing, semi-repeating. View your goal as a means to an end, the end being enjoying yourself, rather than viewing enjoying yourself as a means to achieving your goal. So 5K, that can be your goal, but that is a means to getting healthier or meeting new people or exploring, not meeting new people and exploring and joining a rowing club is a means to getting to 5K, because you might get to 5K and then you might get to 10K and then you might get to 20K, but sooner or later we all fail. And if your outcome is your end rather than your means, then you set yourself up for sort of a catastrophe in your expectations. So my tip is always, you remember, this is about having fun, and everything else is a means to having fun. And they can mean lots of things to different people. Somebody might be really competitive, so the way they have fun is competing, but not winning. Winning sometimes is obviously funner. So that would be my first one. My second one would be, the best kind of exercise for you is the exercise that you do. A lot of people will Google, oh, I've had this burns more calories and that gets you faster. And what about, I've heard swimming is good for this and that's good for this. But if you've Googled it, you found out this burns the most calories, but you don't really enjoy it, then you'll run out of steam a week in, or 2 weeks in, or 4 weeks in, or eventually. So even if you think this is the best thing for you, if you prefer cycling, then take up cycling, even if that's not going to lose the most amount of weight or you're going to give you a chance to win. Like the exercise you do is always better than the exercise you don't do, even if it's on paper not as calorific or whatever metric you're trying to look for.
Yeah, well, 100%, because you're going to end up doing that thing for longer, aren't you? And as I say, over time, you're going to end up pushing those boundaries and trying to find your limits even more within that area.
Yeah, and thirdly, try and really clearly articulate to yourself a range of motivations. Don't just sort of get into it because you like it, which is, it's a good way to start. But think like, what am I really getting out of this? And make sure that some are extrinsic, like a time or a distance, so you have something to work for. But at least a few are intrinsic, that are important to you and you can judge success on. And as I said before, Katrina Douglas and David Careless are 2 people worth Googling. They've got a lot of work on Google Scholar. I think they have a book, which it isn't a self-help book. It's not supposed to be. It is a psychology book that is meant to frame, just to understand why people do stuff. But I found those 3 so helpful, and I cannot think of I can't think of a motivation that doesn't fit under one of them. Maybe the fourth one would be like a charity. Something like a beyond.
That's finding it's finding a reason, isn't it? Something that you believe in, that's going to push you through. And I find a lot of people that I've spoken to, that might have been their first way in, and then they really enjoyed it. And then maybe the second time they've gone to do something and then they've struggled with that motivation because they thought, I really loved it the first time, I raised a lot of money, maybe I'll pay my own entry fee. And then that's been really hard to then motivate themselves. And I think this ties into your third point of defining why are you doing this, and making almost like making a contract with yourself. Like, if you really want to do this, commit to it, make the time, and make that commitment to your colleagues or to your teammates if you're not doing it as an individual.
Yeah. And I guess my fourth and final one would be kind to yourself if you do miss sessions, or even a lot of sessions, or you plateau. Like, we're not professional athletes. There's going to be a week where you're busy. I used to get really fit, and then if I had a week off, then all the momentum would go. But like, if you miss a week or even a month, just get out. You don't have to be on this constant trajectory to getting faster and fitter. Like, you can just get back out there and run next time you feel like it, and then the momentum will look after itself. Sometimes the way you feel means that you want to go for a run, and sometimes going for a run helps the way you feel. So you don't always have to feel super motivated and stuff. Like, just be kind to yourself. Get out there next time you feel like it, or get out there and maybe you'll begin to feel like it again. But you'll plateau. You'll have weeks when you don't go. You'll miss stuff because you go on holiday. Something will happen at work. You don't always have to be just like smashing PBs and getting better and fitter, because at the end of the day, the dream is that you're doing this for the rest of your life. And that is completely ridiculous to expect yourself to be getting fitter and faster and motivated in every day for forever until you're dead.
I think that's probably the most important one out of all of them, to be honest. I think we're so eager to compare ourselves to our colleagues, our friends, people we see on social media, and think, oh, they're not missing runs, they're not missing their training sessions. But yeah, we've got to be kind to ourselves, and that doesn't mean, not going out when you could. But when you do, if you really feel like you can't go, then allow yourself not to go. But then those days when you've got to work hard, you want to achieve your goal, you've got to find that balance, haven't you? You've got to find that balance between knowing when your body needs you to be kind and when your body actually is saying, you know what, we need to push through this a little bit.
Yeah, mainly for me, it's about, if you miss a week, that isn't like a catastrophe and then you end up missing a month. Fine, you've missed a week. Go out next Monday. It doesn't need start again, whatever. And over 50 years, you'll get fitter, even if you lost a bit of fitness over that week.
I heard something recently where they said that they started to look at their successes over a 5-year window rather than a 6-month or a 3-week window. And that way, if they missed a week, that wasn't actually anything massive in the great scheme of their 5-year plan. If you missed a week and your goal is set over 3, then you've just lost a third of your time. But if you've set your goals in far enough in the future, then you're not. It puts things into perspective, I suppose.
It's funny what you say about Strava. Strava, especially segments, mean that we all go too hard too often. I mean, not only is it bad for your mind, and be kind to yourself, I was just saying, but like literally for running, like the science is, you should be doing sort of about 80% of your running at like an easy pace. Even the professional athletes, and right down to the amateurs. It doesn't mean, a lot of amateurs think, well, that's fine for professionals because they can build volume. I've only got 3 runs a week, but even for amateurs, it's just way more beneficial to have the majority of your running it easy. Somebody described it to me as like the fast runs are icing on the cake, but you still need a cake first.
You got to build the engine.
Yeah. So yeah, go easy.
That's an important message, I think, for a lot of us. Definitely for me. I'm
addicted to Strava.
I'm far too hard on myself, and I need to work on that. Finally, Mark, what is your next challenge? Tell us about your goal, your aim for. I think it's this year, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it is this year, and now it isn't. This has been a good test of how much I really believe the nonsense I speak about. So a team and I are supposed to be rowing the Northwest Passage, which is the Arctic route that links the Atlantic to the Pacific. If you think about going into the Arctic between Canada and Greenland and coming out of the Arctic between Russia and Alaska, that's the Northwest Passage. We're not quite doing that whole route the way that the Guinness Book of Records has defined it, as slightly shorter. But that's been the goal. But because there's been some supply chain issues with COVID and a bunch of other stuff, going on and a bad weather ice forecast. We're not doing it this year. It's been delayed till next year. But we
Right.
still need to get the boats to the start line, and you need to do it when the ice is broken up, which is now. So the plan is to row the boats to the start line. I'm going from Iceland around the tip of Greenland into Greenland. And if that had happened to me, well, when it did happen, we delayed it because of COVID. I was devastated because for all this talk, of relationships and stuff, I still wanted to be the first person to do it, and it was still really important to me. And there was a team of kayakers, and they were going to go. And if the first is the first under human power, so they would be the first under human power, being kayakers. And I was just so livid that we were delaying. Anyway, they delayed as well, and they're now, but they haven't delayed this year. They're going now, and I hope the best for them, and that they make it through. And contrast my reaction last time, where I was livid to be losing the world first. Now I'm thinking, well, if the outcome that I'm looking for is a shared effort rather than a arbitrary world first or some extrinsic performance of measurement, if the outcome I'm looking for is a monumental shared effort, or rowing from Iceland to Greenland is going to be a monumental shared effort, it will deliver to me all that I'm looking for. It will be a fantastic, amazing adventure, just as hard. I mean, rowing from Iceland to Greenland, I probably, actually, to be fair, I probably still a world first. But, but anything's a world first. You can draw two random points on a map. But yeah, it was sort of gratifying to know when we were delaying it, and I was just as excited about, Iceland to Greenland. That'd be amazing. We'll see some killer whales, and then the tip of Greenland, and then we'll see up Baffin Bay. Then we'll stop in Nuke. I thought, this is going to be great, rather than, damn it, I lost that chance yet again. It didn't matter to me, so it's nice to know. So now, yes, I guess a long-winded answer is the ultimate goal is Northwest Passage. The short-term goal is Iceland to Greenland. But yeah, getting to the start line is always the hardest part, so we'll see.
That's a brilliant way to wrap this up. You've just demonstrated how you've reframed your whole event, which is what we've been talking about for the last 30 minutes. So we wish you all the luck with your challenge, both of them now. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to, as schools, follow your journey when we get to it. And we'll chat closer to the time to make sure that we can share what you're doing with as many children and teachers as possible, and share your story. And for any teachers who would like to hear you speak, or maybe have you talk in their schools, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
You probably can just message me on Instagram. I'm at Adventure Agnew, and just send me a DM. And I'm always happy to chat. To state schools, I'm always happy to do it for free if that means a Zoom call or video, or if I'm in the area coming in, then it's I'm always happy to help and see what I can do.
Really, really appreciate your time, Mark. Thank you again. And I hope to have a chat with you again in the not too distant future. So thank you.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Not a problem. And thank you, everyone, for listening. We've got another 1 or 2 episodes left in this short series. So we hope you tune in again soon. Bye bye.